Bereavement in Judaism is a combination of minhag and mitzvah derived from Judaism's classical Torah and rabbinic texts. The details of observance and practice vary according to each Jewish community. Upon receiving the news of the passing, the following blessing is recited. Transliteration: Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, den ha-emet. Translation: Blessed be you, Lord, our God, King of the universe, the Judge of truth. There is also a custom of rending one's clothes at the moment one hears news of a passing. Orthodox men will cut the lapel of the suit. Non-Orthodox practice may be to cut a necktie or to wear a button with a torn black ribbon. This symbolic practice is called wearing a cryar ribbon. However, cutting an actual garment is preferred, as there is question whether one fulfills the obligations through a ribbon. Shevra Kadisha. The Shevra Kadisha is a Jewish burial society usually consisting of volunteers, men and women, who prepare the deceased for proper Jewish burial. Their job is to ensure that the body of the deceased is shown proper respect, richly cleansed, and shrouded. Many local Shevra Kadishas in urban areas are affiliated with local synagogues, and they often own their own burial plots in various local cemeteries. Some Jews pay an annual token membership fee to the Shevra Kadisha of their choice, so that when the time comes, the society will not only attend to the body of the deceased as befits Jewish law, but will also ensure burial in a plot that it controls at an appropriate nearby Jewish cemetery. If no gravediggers are available, then it is additionally the function of the male society members to ensure that graves are dug. In Israel, members of Shevra Kadishas consider it an honor to not only prepare the body for burial but also to dig the grave for a fellow Jew's body, particularly if the deceased was known to be a righteous person. Many burial societies hold 1 or 2 annual fast days and organize regular study sessions to remain up to date with the relevant articles of Jewish law. In addition, most burial societies also support families during the Shiva by arranging prayer services, preparing meals, and providing other services from the mourners. Preparing the body, tahara. There are 3 major stages to preparing the body for burial: washing, ritual purification, and dressing. The term tahara is used to refer both to the overall process of burial preparation and to the specific step of ritual purification. Prayers and readings from Torah, including Psalms, Song of Songs, Isaiah, Ezekiel, and Zechariah, are recited. The general sequence of steps for performing tahara is as follows. The body is uncovered. The body is washed carefully. Any bleeding is stopped and all blood is buried along with the deceased. The body is thoroughly cleaned of dirt, body fluids, and solids, and anything else that may be on the skin. All jewelry is removed. The beard is not shaved. The body is purified with water, either by immersion in a mikveh or by pouring a continuous stream of 9 kavim in a prescribed manner. The body is dried. The body is dressed in traditional burial clothing. A sash is wrapped around the clothing and tied in the form of the Hebrew letter Shin, representing one of the names of God. The casket is prepared by removing any linings or other embellishments. A winding sheet is laid into the casket. Outside the land of Israel, if the deceased wore a prayer shawl during the life, one is laid in the casket for wrapping the body. Once it is placed therein, one of the corner fringes is removed from the shawl to signify that it will no longer be used for prayer and that the person is absolved from having to keep any of the mitzvot. The body is lifted into the casket and wrapped in the prayer shawl and sheet. Soil from Eretz Israel, if available, is placed over various parts of the body and sprinkled in the casket. The casket is closed. After the closing of the casket, the Shevra asks forgiveness of the deceased for any inadvertent lack of honor shown to the deceased in the preparation of the body for burial. There is no viewing of the body and no open casket at the funeral. Sometimes the immediate family pay their final respects before the funeral. In Israel, caskets are not used at all, with the exception of military and state funerals. Instead, the body is carried to the grave wrapped in a tallit and placed directly in the earth. In the diaspora, in general, a casket is only used if required by local law. In the United States, a casket is always required. From death until burial, it is traditional for guards or watchers to stay with the deceased. It is traditional to recite psalms during this time. Funeral service. The Jewish funeral consists of a burial, also known as an interment. Cremation is forbidden. Burial is considered to allow the body to decompose naturally, therefore embalming is forbidden. Burial is intended to take place in as short an interval of time after death as possible. Displaying of the body prior to burial does not take place. Flowers are usually not found at a traditional Jewish funeral but may be seen at statesmen's or heroes' funerals in Israel. In Israel, the Jewish funeral service usually commences at the burial ground. In the United States and Canada, the funeral service commences either at a funeral home or at the cemetery. Occasionally the service will commence at a synagogue. In the case of a prominent individual, the funeral service can begin at a synagogue or a yeshiva. If the funeral service begins at a point other than at the cemetery, the entourage accompanies the body in a procession to the cemetery. The funeral, the procession accompanying the body to the place of burial, and a burial are referred to by the word lever, meaning escorting. Lever also indicates joining and bonding. Quote, "This aspect of the meaning of lever conveys the suggestion of the commonality among the souls of the living and the dead." Eulogies. A hesp is a eulogy, and it is common for several people to speak at the start of the ceremony at the funeral home, as well as prior to burial at the gravesite. Some people specify in the wills that nothing should be said about them. On certain days, such as on Chol Hamoed and during the month of Nisan, eulogies are forbidden. Burial. Kevura, or burial, should take place as soon as possible after death. The Torah requires burial as soon as possible, even for executed criminals. Burial is delayed for the honor of the deceased, usually to allow more time for far-flung family to come to the funeral and participate in the other post-burial rituals, but also to hire professionals, or to bury the deceased in a cemetery of their choice. In practice, it is extremely unusual for burial to be delayed more than 72 hours after death. This traditional practice may have originated from the fact that Israel was, and is, a country with a hot climate. In biblical times there were few ways of keeping the dead body from decomposing. Not only would this be generally undesirable, but allowing the dead body of any person to decompose would be showing that person great disrespect. Thus, it became customary to bury the body as soon as possible. In addition, respect for the dead can be seen from many examples in the Torah and Tanakh. For example, one of the last events in the Torah is the death of Moses when God himself buried him in the depression in the land of Moab, opposite Beth Peor. No man knows the place that he was buried, even to this day. In many traditional funerals, the casket will be carried from the hearse to the grave in 7 stages. These are accompanied by 7 recitations of Psalm chapter 91. There is a symbolic pause after each stage. When the funeral service has ended, the mourners come forward to fill the grave. Symbolically, this gives the mourners closure as they observe or participate in the filling of the gravesite. One custom is for all people present at the funeral to take a spade or shovel held pointing down instead of up, to show the antithesis of death to life and that this use of the shovel is different from all other uses. to throw 3 shovelfuls of dirt into the grave. When someone is finished, they put the shovel back in the ground, rather than handing it to the next person, to avoid passing along the grief to other mourners. This literal participation in the burial is considered a particularly good mitzvah because it is one for which the beneficiary, the deceased, can offer no repayment or gratitude, and thus it is a pure gesture. After burial, the Tzedakah prayer may be recited, affirming that divine judgment is righteous. The family of deceased may then be comforted by other mourners with the formula, Hamakom Wina Hemet Kambito Kshar Avalizi Yon Virushalayim. The Omnipresent will comfort you among the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. Mourning. Keria and Shiva. The mourners traditionally make a tear in an outer garment either before the funeral or immediately after it. The tear should be on the left side for a parent, including foster parents, and on the right side for siblings, children, and spouses. In practice, in order not unnecessarily to destroy expensive dress clothes, non-Orthodox Jews will often make the keria in a small black ribbon that is pinned to the lapel rather than in the lapel poche. Halachos concerning mourning do not apply to those under 13 years of age. Also, halachos of mourning do not apply when the deceased is aged 30 days or less. In the instance when a mourner receives the news of the death and burial of a relative after an elapsed period of 30 days or more, there is no keria or tearing of the garment, except in the case of a parent. In the case of a parent, the tearing of the garment is to be performed no matter how long a period has elapsed between the time of death and the time of receiving the news. If a child of the deceased needs to change clothes during the Shiva period, he must tear the changed clothes. No other family member is required to rend changed clothes during Shiva. Children of the deceased may never sew the rent clothes, but any other mourner may mend the clothing 30 days after the burial. When they get home, the mourners refrain for a week from showering or bathing, wearing leather shoes or jewelry, or shaving. In many communities, mirrors in the mourner's home are covered since they should not be concerned about the personal appearance. It is customary for the mourners to sit on low stools or even the floor, symbolic of the emotional reality of being brought low by the grief. The meal of consolation, the first meal eaten on returning from the funeral, traditionally consists of hard-boiled eggs and other round or oblong foods. This is often credited to the biblical story of Jacob purchasing the birthright from Esau with stewed lentils. It is traditionally stated that Jacob was cooking the lentils soon after the death of his grandfather Abraham. During this 7-day period, family and friends come to visit or call on the mourners to comfort them, commencing and calculating the 7 days of mourning. If the mourner returns from the cemetery after the burial before sundown, then the day of the funeral is counted as the first of the 7 days of mourning. Mourning generally concludes in the morning of the 7th day. No mourning may occur on Shabbat, nor may the burial take place on Shabbat, but the day of Shabbat does count as one of the 7 days. If a Jewish holiday occurs after the first day, that curtails the mourning period. If the funeral occurs during a festival, the start of the mourning period awaits the end of the festival. Some holidays, such as Rosh Hashanah, cancel the mourning period completely. Stages of mourning. Ananut. The first stage of mourning is Ananut, or intense mourning. An Oren is considered to be in a state of total shock and disorientation. Thus the Oren is exempt from performing mitzvot that require action, such as praying and reciting blessings, wearing tefillin, in order to be able to tend unhindered to the funeral arrangements. However, the Oren is still obligated in commandments that forbid an action. Ananut lasts until the burial is over, or, if a mourner is unable to attend the funeral, For the moment he is no longer involved with the funeral itself. Avalat Ananut is immediately followed by Avalat. An Aval does not listen to music or go to concerts, and does not attend any joyous events or parties such as marriages or bar or bat mitzvahs, unless absolutely necessary. Avalat consists of 3 distinct periods. Shiva, 7 days. The first stage of Avalat is Shiva, a week-long period of grief and mourning. Observance of Shiva is referred to by English-speaking Jews as sitting Shiva. During this period, mourners traditionally gather in one home and receive visitors. It is considered a great mitzvah of kindness and compassion to pay a home visit to the mourners. Traditionally, no greetings are exchanged and visitors wait for the mourners to initiate conversation. The mourner is under no obligation to engage in conversation and may, in fact, completely ignore his/her visitors. Visitors will traditionally take on the hosting role when attending a Shiva, often bringing food and serving it to the mourning family and other guests. The mourning family will often avoid any cooking or cleaning during the Shiva period. Those responsibilities become those of visitors. There are various customs as to what to say when taking leave of the mourner. One of the most common is to say to them, "A funeral can take place at a graveside or funeral home." Selections are read from the Torah for the deceased. Once at the graveside, the service consists of reciting a prayer which expresses acceptance of God's decisions, followed by the reciting of more prayers. After the funeral, those attending form 2 lines and the mourners pass between them. As they do, traditional words are said, Ha-makom yinak-make embitokshi ra-velizi yon ve'rushalayim. May God comfort you among all the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. After the funeral, Shiva lasts 7 days. The day of the funeral is the first day and 1 hour of the 7th day counts as a full day. Shiva is gone at 1 o'clock Friday afternoon and is resumed after Shabbat is over. The Shiva period begins after the burial with a simple meal of consolation. One must rinse one's hands with water before entering the house for the meal. This meal is given by family and friends for the mourners. This meal regularly includes hard-boiled eggs, representing a symbol of life, and simple foods. Neither meat nor wine, 2 symbols of joy, are to be served at this meal. Mourners stay together at the place where Shiva is experienced. If they are not able to do so, they sleep in their own homes and return to the Shiva house in the next morning. Mourners do not go to work during this time. This is done because Jews see that when a major change in life has been taken place, the community of the deceased needs to step out of everyday activities for a while. While observing Shiva, there are a number of practices being practiced. There is a 7-day candle is lit for returning from the cemetery. Mourners avoid activities like entertainment during this week. During this time, they change the way they live. Mourners do not wear shoes and sit on low stools during Shiva. Also at this time, community visits are demonstrated. The visits help the mourners get over the feelings of isolation and depression over the deceased. All the conversations should stay focused around the memory of the deceased. Hamakum wina hemet kumbito kshar avalizi yon Yerushalayim. The Omnipresent will comfort you among the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem, depending on their community's customs. Others may also add such wishes as, you should have no more Tzeda'ah, or you should have only Simchas, or we should hear only Basoro Tavo from each other, or I wish you a long life. Traditionally, prayer services are organized in the house of mourning. It is customary for the family to lead the services themselves. Shloshim, 30 days. The 30-day period following burial is known as Shloshim. During Shloshim, a mourner is forbidden to marry or to attend a Sudat mitzvah. Men do not shave or get haircuts during this time, since Judaism teaches that a deceased person can still benefit from the merit of mitzvah performed in the memory. It is considered a special privilege to bring merit to the departed by learning Torah in the name. A popular custom is to coordinate a group of people who will jointly study the complete Mishnah during the Shloshim period. This is due to the fact that Mishnah and Neshama, soul, have the same letters. Shnai Mesar Chodesh, 12 months. Those mourning a parent additionally observe a 12-month period, counted from the day of death. During this period, most activity returns to normal, although the mourners continue to recite the mourner's Kaddish as part of synagogue services for 11 months. In Orthodox tradition, this was an obligation of the sons as mourners. There remain restrictions on attending festive occasions and large gatherings, especially where live music is performed. Mitzvah. A headstone is known as a mitzvah. Although there is no halakhic obligation to hold an unveiling ceremony, there are varying customs about when it should be placed on the grave. Most communities have an unveiling ceremony a year after the death. Some communities have it earlier, even a week after the burial. In Israel it is done after the Shloshim. There is no restriction about the timing other than the unveiling cannot be held during certain periods such as Passover or Chol Hamoed. At the end of the ceremony, a cloth shroud covering that has been placed on the headstone is removed, customarily by close family members. Services include reading of several psalms, mourner's Kaddish, and the prayer El Malei Rachimim. The service may include a brief eulogy for the deceased. Annual remembrances. Yahrzeit. Nashila Yahrzeit means time year in Yiddish. Alternative spellings include Yortzeit, Derived, Yohrzeit, Yahrite, and Yahrzeit. The word is used by Yiddish-speaking Jews, and refers to the anniversary of the day of death of a relative. Yahrzeit literally means time of year. The commemoration is known in Hebrew as Nashila. This term is used by most Sephardic Jews, although some use the Ladino terms Meldado or less commonly, Ennius. It is widely observed, and based on the Jewish tradition that mourners are required to commemorate the death of a relative. Jews are required to commemorate the death of parents, siblings, spouses, or children. When a first relative initially hears of the death of a relative, it is traditional to express one's grief by tearing the clothing and saying, Baruch Den Hemed. Shiva is observed by parents, children, spouses and siblings of the deceased, preferably all together in the deceased's home. The main halakhic obligation is to recite the mourner's version of the Kaddish prayer at least 3 times, Mariv at the evening services, Shacharit at morning services, and Minha at the afternoon services. The customs are first discussed in detail in Sefer HaMinhagim by Rabbi Isaac Timau. The Yahrzeit usually falls annually on the Hebrew date of the deceased relative's death according to the Hebrew calendar. There are questions that arise as to what the date should be if this date falls on Rosh Chodesh or in a leap year of the Hebrew calendar. In particular, there are a few permutations, as follows. Yahrzeit is done each year, for a full day on the date of death according to the Hebrew calendar. The synagogue notifies members of the secular date. The names of the deceased are read at the proper evening service and at the Friday evening service the week before the Yahrzeit. The main halakhic obligation is to recite the mourner's version of the Kaddish prayer 3 times. Many attend synagogue for the evening, morning, and afternoon services on this day. As a widely practiced custom, mourners also light a special candle that burns for 24 hours, called a Yahrzeit candle. Lighting a Yahrzeit candle in memory of a loved one is a minhag that is deeply ingrained in Jewish life, honoring the memory and souls of the deceased. Some Jews believe that strict Jewish law requires that one should fast on the day of a parent's Yahrzeit, although most believe this is not required. Some people do observe the custom of fasting on the day of the Yahrzeit, or at least refraining from meat and wine. Among many Orthodox Jews it has become customary to make a sign by completing a tractate of Talmud or a volume of the Mishnah on the day prior to the Yahrzeit, in the honor of the deceased. A halakha requiring a sign upon the completion of such a study overrides the requirement to fast. Many synagogues will have lights on a special memorial plaque on one of the synagogue's walls, with names of synagogue members who have died. Each of these lights will be lit for individuals on the Yahrzeit, and all the lights will be lit for a year's course service. Some synagogues will also turn on all the lights for memorial days, such as Yom HaZohar. Visiting the gravesites. Some have a custom to visit the cemetery on fast days and before Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, when possible, and for a Yahrzeit. During the first year, the grave is often visited on the Shloshim and the Yahrzeit. Even when visiting Jewish graves of someone that the visitor never knew, the custom is to place a small stone on the grave using the left hand. This shows that someone visited the gravesite, and is also a way of participating in the mitzvah of burial. Leaving flowers is not a traditional Jewish practice. Another reason for leaving stones is to turn the grave. In biblical times, gravestones were not used. Graves were marked with mounds of stones, so by placing them, one perpetuated the existence of the site. The tradition to travel to the graveside on the occasion of a Yahrzeit is ancient.